My fiancé and my sister cheated on me. My story takes place over a 1.5 year period of time before the pandemic. The first pass I made at this as a way to try and sort out my feelings ended up being pages of bullet points. That really didn't help me, so I've taken the time to write this down as a story of what happened and be honest with myself about its fallout. Language has been toned down because it's going on SM. I, 26M, met Emily, 25F, at college like many people. We started off as friends and grew into a relationship. We dated for 4 years before I asked her to marry me. In my own jaded opinion, we were as in love as any couple could be. We were emotionally and physically close and enjoyed each other's company. I felt like we had a perfect relationship. I got off early from work a little before noon, and as I approached the house after a short day at work, I was looking forward to seeing my now fiancée, Emily. Little did I know that this ordinary day would be the day I was betrayed by everyone I loved. Entering the house, I looked for Emily, excited to see her. The near silence, broken by the faint sounds of physical intimacy coming from the direction of the bedroom, hit me like a punch to the gut. I could hear the sounds of my girlfriend moaning and saying, "Yes, there. Right there." I stood there for a minute, stunned at what I was hearing. I stood there as quietly as possible, trying to process what I was hearing. I guess I knew what it was subconsciously, but I just stood there in shock. After a few moments, I took out my phone and started recording as I walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I fully expected to walk in on Emily with another man, so my adrenaline was pumping, and I was angry and ready for a fight. I threw it open as I got to the door, not expecting the sight that met my eyes, turning my world upside down. Emily and my older sister, Rachel, 28F, were on my bed. They were both completely unclothed, and Emily was on her knees facing the headboard, holding onto it with her hands. Rachel was behind her with her face buried in Emily. Emily was moaning, telling Rachel not to stop. I let out an audible gasp in absolute shock, realizing what was going on. In a moment frozen in time, their startled expressions met mine. I'll never forget that Rachel's face was wet from Emily. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath me, making my head swim. As Rachel spun away from Emily, getting onto her feet on the opposite side of the bed, Emily sort of collapsed and buried her face into the bedding and started crying. Rachel stood there shaking, trying to cover herself with her hands. I can't even adequately describe the next couple of minutes. At least neither of them tried to convince me that they could explain. On the contrary, they didn't say anything. Rachel just had a horrified look on her face as she was trying to get dressed and Emily just sobbed into the pillow. I stood in my own bedroom and recorded 2 of the 3 most important women in my life cheating on me. I screamed at them, not even knowing what I was saying. I was furious as I turned and stormed out of the house. I was so enraged that the only thing I wanted was immediate revenge. I took the video of them in bed and sent it to my parents and Emily's mother. I captioned that Emily and Rachel are closer than we thought. Then I said that Emily and I were done as a couple, and Rachel was no longer my sister. Within a few minutes, my mom called via the family FaceTime group. I ignored it. She kept trying to get me to pick up, but I was pretty pissed off, so I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. A few minutes later, my mom texted me that I needed to call her immediately. The way she phrased the message made it clear she was mad at me. I ignored that, too, and just drove. I ended up at the beach a couple of hours away from my house and spent the rest of the day there, just sitting on the sand watching the waves with my phone turned off. It took me more than a few hours to get my head straight and drive home. It was late when I returned, or should I say really early. Emily wasn't at home, and the bedroom was cleaned and the bed made. The rest of the house was cleaned as well, including the kitchen. To this day, I don't know what was going on in Emily's head that made her want to clean the house. Maybe some subconscious thing about cleaning up her mess? Her stuff seemed to be there, but her small bag was gone out of the closet, so I assumed she went to her parents' house. My phone was off and still sitting in the center console glove box of my car, so I wasn't about to get any messages for a while. I fell asleep on the couch and didn't wake until banging on my door forced me awake. It was my parents and Rachel. I had rekeyed the deadbolt to our old house key. Actually, it was for my parents' back door. The lock was designed to allow rekeying, so I changed it when I got back so Emily couldn't enter the house without my permission. This is a small house that I purchased myself after college. My parents were seemingly desperate to mend what had been broken, but my mom took my sister's side, shouting at me that sending the video went too far and embarrassed Rachel. My dad was calm but begged me to forgive my sister and mend that broken bond. Yeah, like that was going to happen. I stood there, caught between a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of hurt. My mom was still yelling at me about how I handled it, with Rachel standing behind my mom, looking at the floor, not talking. I looked my mom dead in the eye and snapped. I told her I knew she would take Rachel's side because we all knew where Rachel got that trait. It was mean, but I was angry, and my mother had casually thrown away my feelings in favor of my sister. My mom's infidelity was the worst kept secret in our family. My dad had caught her years ago with some guy from her work. He decided to stay with her, but Rachel and I had heard the arguments coming from my parents' bedroom for weeks. My mom gasped and flinched back like I had slapped her, turning white. She started stammering about how dare I say that to her. I looked her in the eyes and told her that we all knew what she did, and I blasted her, saying that Dad should have left her for what she did to him. I yelled at her that she was a cheater defending a cheater. My dad was white in the face, too, but just stood there with a stunned look. How could they expect me to forgive and forget, to sweep aside the pain I was feeling? The foundation of trust had been smashed. I looked at all of them and told them they were a crappy excuse for a family. Rachel was in tears crying but wouldn't look at me. I called her a few names that made her leave the house. My mom objected to what I said and started to defend Rachel again, so I yelled at her to get the F out, too. My dad understood this wouldn't end well, so he ushered her out of the house, and they left. Days turned into weeks, then months, as I grappled with emotions I had never experienced before. Try to imagine how it would feel to be betrayed by everyone in your family on the same day. The idea of forgiveness seemed distant and frankly unrealistic. I realized that I had to make a choice that prioritized my emotional well-being over my family's distorted view of my situation. While I understood that families were meant to stand by one another, my pain was too raw to ignore. With a heavy heart, I decided to distance myself from the people who had caused me so much pain. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness, it was about self-preservation. I needed time to heal, to come to terms with the betrayal that had reshaped my reality. When my birthday came and went without answering my family's well wishes, it went without comment. When Thanksgiving came and went, and I was a no-show, even with my dad pleading for me to attend dinner at the house with the family, I ignored him. My dad texted me that my mother was devastated that I abandoned them. When I again ghosted the family over Christmas and New Year, I was told that my mom had a breakdown and was going to stay with her sister, who was out of state. I just ignored it all. They made their bed, and they would need to sleep in it. As I navigated this new reality, I found the support of friends who stood by me without judgment. Their supportive presence reminded me that I was free to rebuild my life. Time dulled the pain, but I couldn't find it in myself to forgive the women in my life. I'm estranged from my mother and sister and only rarely speak with my father. He tried to get me to meet them halfway but backed off when I threatened to pull back from him if he didn't respect my wishes. I know he was angry at my sister but still defended my mom. After my mother returned home, she finally took Rachel to task and told her that she and my dad would not speak with her again until she found a way to reconnect with me. Too little, too late. She was asked to leave their house and find a new place to live. Rachel had been living there since she broke up with her husband several years earlier. It's funny because she claimed he cheated on her and kicked her out, but his story was that she cheated on him, and he had left her. I think you all know who I believe at this point. Rachel has been working on trying to meet up with me and has been begging me to let her have a chance to apologize to me. How do you apologize to a sibling when you cheat with their partner? I don't know what to do about this since she's obviously not going to stop unless I ghost everyone that I know and move somewhere else out of state. I will not let my parents set the condition for them to reconnect with Rachel with the condition that I forgive her. I will never forgive her. After a few months of ignoring her, Emily eventually moved on. I expected to hear that she was in a relationship with my sister, but that seems to have been some sleazy hookup. Emily went off the rails and found a boyfriend more aligned with her interest in exploring her sexuality. I found out through some mutual friends who are still in touch with her that her new BF was arrested for SA when she didn't want to go through with some deviant plan he had. Emily is in therapy and seems like she's in bad shape. About 9 months after that day I walked in on them, Emily's parents reached out to me. Emily seemed to be doing better, and the family let their guard down long enough that Emily attempted to delete herself and almost succeeded. After being under a mandatory hold at the local hospital, she was admitted because she continued to talk about self-harm. She's been under the watchful eye of the local mental health care professionals. Her parents have been begging me to see her. They have told me that they don't expect anything from me other than to let Emily get whatever baggage off of her soul that she needs to. They are hoping that if she can get that off her shoulders, it will allow her to start healing. I was convinced to see her because they had always been cool. She was a shadow of her former self and looked 30 pounds lighter. Her skin was sallow, and she looked like someone who lost weight too quickly. Her eyes were sunken, and it took me a moment to recognize her. Her skin sagged in places a woman in her 20s shouldn't have. You could see bones from her joints protruding. Her parents told me that she was also being treated for substance abuse that started shortly after our breakup. When we met, she had this strange look on her face like she was seeing a hallucination, reaching out to touch me but couldn't. She started crying and telling me that all she wanted to do was die for hurting me. What sort of response can a person have to that? How am I supposed to process something to the extent that this person I loved with all my heart wants to erase herself from our world because she hurt me? After talking with her as long as the facility allowed, I left for the day and let her parents know I had spoken to her. To me, she seemed to be marginally better after she could say what she wanted. Emily accepted responsibility for her actions that day and said she had no excuse other than she made some life-altering bad decisions that she would regret for the rest of her life. She tried to hold me, but the staff told me that physical interaction other than holding hands in plain sight was prohibited. Even with that in place, she was searched before returning to her room. I have returned regularly to see Emily at the urging of her family and doctor. She showed significant improvement after my first visit, and they basically begged me to continue helping her back to normalcy. I don't know anything in detail regarding her relationship with the guy who was now in jail, so I can't relate how that affected her overall mental state. Emily didn't speak of what happened to me regarding the assault. I guess that it's a different wound that will need to heal. I had a choice to make. Emily was being released from the facility again but needed to be under family care. I agreed to continue visiting her regularly until she seemed stable enough to move on. Over the next few months, she regained enough of the lost weight to look more like herself. She was still very thin, but the color of her complexion was now normal, and her skin no longer sagged. Sorry to grind on about this. It's been very helpful for me to take the time to order this in my head and think about everything that happened and the strange details that stick out in my memory. Emily and I sat on her parents' back porch on a warm spring day. They have a nice view from the top of a hill down onto some land that was passed to them by her grandparents. Most of the trees had leaves, and some bushes had flowers blooming. It was a perfect day. Emily got up and asked if I wanted tea or a beer, so I asked her for some iced tea that her mom had made. Emily smiled and entered the house, coming out with some drinks and an assortment of pastries on a tray. As I was choosing what I wanted, I realized that my iced tea had just the right amount of sweetener, and the pastry on the tray were all ones that I liked. Emily's mom loved to bake, and I always enjoyed visiting. The natural way Emily slipped back into knowing me and subconsciously kind of bugged me because it made me feel uncomfortable. Earlier at lunch, Emily had made a plate for me without thinking about it like she used to. As we all sat for lunch, my plate had everything Elle would have put on it in the amounts I would have chosen. I looked at her as she and her mom continued to fill all the plates for themselves and her dad. I had this strong feeling of déjà vu, realizing I'd seen it dozens of times before. Eventually, Emily asked me if I would be willing to start going with her to see her therapist. I honestly didn't want to dredge up any of the parts of our past, but Emily said that she was seeing the therapist for the assault, and she was in a place where it was hard for her to talk about it without reliving it. I was terrified to attend this, but she seemed to need it as the next stepping stone. I have to admit that it was a really tough couple of months. She went weekly and spent the entire time talking about the abusive relationship and what happened. At the end of one particularly hard session, Emily ended up sobbing uncontrollably in my arms, and I held her as I had months before she blurted out that she was pregnant. I don't even know how to process this since I'm assuming the father is in prison. I held her until she stopped crying and told her that she wouldn't have to do this alone. Yeah, knee-jerk reply. So, I'm going to have to figure that out. I may not love Emily anymore, but I've forgiven her. I will not forgive my sister or my mom. There's a point where you have to hold the line, and I reached that point with my mom. My mom never apologized for taking Rachel's side. She only relented, kicking her out because our extended family didn't support her decision. I candidly talked with my dad about the fact that I didn't want my mom in my life moving forward. I told my dad I would never interact with the extended family as long as my sister or mother were involved. I told him I wouldn't be there for her or my sister later in life. I also told him they would not be part of my own family when that happened. This was the only time in my life I heard him cry. She made her decisions and will pay for them. Who knows, maybe she doesn't really care. There are things that family should never do, and Rachel crossed that line knowing it was one of those ultimate betrayals, and my mom took her side. So be it.
I only post new unique content. Please like and subscribe.